They had demanded Earth's surrender. Instead, Earth sent a box. No words. No guards. No paperwork. Just a single steel cylinder rolling down the polished floor of the Galactic Council chamber, and clicking to a stop in the silence. The Supreme Chancellor leaned forward and scoffed. "What is this insult?" Then the capsule cracked open with a hiss. Mist hissed out and something stepped forward barefoot, taller than any council guard, with metal-threaded veins and burning eyes like twin supernovas. She blinked slowly, studied the room, then whispered into the silence. "This is not a negotiation. This is your extinction protocol." The screams started half a second later. They'd believed Earth was primitive, reactive, unfit for intergalactic presence. For years, the Council had watched humanity from afar, cataloging their wars, their erratic evolution, their unnerving ability to weaponize everything from viruses to religion. Earth was dangerous, yes, but in their eyes, dangerously stupid. So when Earth declined a third Council invitation to join their ranks and instead started pushing terraforming satellites beyond the outer belt, the Council took it as rebellion. A vote was cast. The verdict was unanimous. Earth would be brought into compliance, with or without consent. On the morning of the verdict, a transmission was sent to Earth's central embassy hub. It didn't contain a declaration of war, but something worse, a notice of forfeiture. All Earth-based sovereignty would cease within 72 hours. Their planetary defense grid would be dismantled. Their leadership replaced with Council proxies. Their culture, education, and military archived, studied, and purged. The document was written in 6 languages, sealed with the Prime Sigil, and backed by 2 Council fleets positioned just outside Pluto's shadow. At the Kyoto consulate, Earth Ambassador Darien reviewed the transmission in silence. Around him, aides began to panic. One assistant threw up into a potted plant. Another started burning Earth treaties into ash out of rage. But Darien only set the transmission aside and whispered, "Send them her file." The room fell quiet. Then someone in the back, pale-faced and sweating, said, "Sir, are you sure? It's not even field-tested. She's not finished." Darien simply nodded and walked out into the morning sun, leaving the weight of that decision to history. Or to vengeance. At the Galactic Council chamber, which floated in zero gravity on a gleaming disk of obsidian metal orbiting trinelix, the mood was smug. Alien delegates of every size, shape, and species reclined in marble pods. Some chirped. Others thumped their tails. A few floated. They laughed at the absence of Earth's official representatives. A minor Zwiankra governor mocked Earth's fondness for leather boots. A reptilian judge pretended to grunt like an ape. The chamber's arrogance thickened with every second. Then the doors creaked open. 2 humans walked in, Darien, and behind him, something carrying a black capsule the size of a cargo pod. No armed escort. No battalion. Just the capsule. Darien didn't speak. He simply rolled the cylinder across the floor until it stopped at the center. No ceremony. No explanation. Supreme Chancellor Vosky leaned forward, his silver crest gleaming in the artificial starlight. "Do you intend to beg for leniency, Ambassador?" Darien smiled faintly. "No. I'm here to deliver an update." The capsule cracked open. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a bomb. It was a woman, if you could still call her that. 7 feet tall. Hair woven with living data strands. Her pupils glitched like deep space code. Her spine adjusted as she rose, metallic seams stretching and contracting with quiet clicks. Her voice was soft. "This chamber is not shielded. That was your second mistake." Vosky opened his mouth to order an emergency response. But before he could speak, every energy rifle in the room exploded in the guard's hands, as if short-circuited from within. A golden haze filtered down from the ceiling like toxic pollen. Delegates coughed. Screamed. Shields failed. Zero stepped forward. Darien simply turned and walked out. She didn't run. She didn't raise a weapon. She just walked, and with every step, the lights dimmed. Council translators failed. Implants malfunctioned. One delegate began sobbing in a language extinct for 3 centuries. Another tried to flee and was vaporized by her own shadow as it detached from her and blocked the exit. The Galactic Council, with its 1,000-year legacy of dominance, had never prepared for a threat that smiled while dismantling everything silently. Zero didn't monologue. She didn't negotiate. She whispered to the chamber. "We did not come here to join you. We came to end you." In the private war room orbiting Trinelix's North Pole, emergency signals exploded across communication lines. "Unknown entity has breached Prime Chamber. Defensive protocols offline. Council DNA archives corrupted. Who is she?" No one had answers. Because the truth was sealed in Earth's oldest vaults. Her name was Zero. Not born but built. Grown in a fusion lab beneath the Antarctic core after Earth's second contact war. A hybrid of human brilliance and stolen alien genetics. Her muscle fibers were woven from repurposed Krieg skin. Her bone density had been reinforced with Varaxium steel, metal once thought to be alive. Her mind, though, that was the most terrifying part. She didn't just think. She adapted. She learned. She evolved in real time. And she never forgot the laboratory where the Galactic Council had once dissected a human child and laughed at how primitive its neural cortex was. That child had been her brother. Earth had been patient. Earth had remembered. Earth had waited. And Earth had built her. Outside the chamber, Council ships began to panic, rerouting patrols and deploying failsafes. But one by one, their systems were hacked, without satellite links, without physical contact. Their engines failed mid-burn. Commanders vanished mid-sentence, replaced by looping Earth nursery rhymes. Every screen in the Trinelix orbit displayed the same words. "You declared surrender. We accepted. Yours." Back in the chamber, Zero stood in the center. Her eyes glowed. Her hand raised. And every delegate dropped to the floor, not dead, but paralyzed. Locked in a moment of terror so complete it would stain their DNA for generations. One delegate, still twitching, managed to whisper, "What are you?" She looked at him like he'd asked why the stars were hot. "I'm Earth's answer." And then she vanished. No explosion. No aftershock. Just silence. Just fear. Just every single power in the galaxy realizing the same thing at once. They didn't start a war. They triggered an extinction protocol. And Earth had already dropped it. The rumors began before the council chamber's floor stopped smoking. Across the galaxy, whispers surged through data streams, pirate frequencies, black site relay towers and military satellites alike. Something had awakened. Something Earth had hidden. The Council's top planetary commanders scrambled for answers, but all central files relating to Earth's military were now corrupted. Backup archives looped the same 3-second video of a woman stepping out of mist and saying one sentence. No name, no rank, no nation. Just her voice, low and even. "I am Earth's answer." Whole fleets went silent after watching it. Several species declared emergency neutrality. Others evacuated outer border colonies. The Council's most feared warlords sat quietly in their bunkers, asking the same question. Who is she? She was never born in the way others were. She had no mother, no cries, no cradle. Her first memory was not warmth, but weight, the weight of atmosphere settling into her lungs as technicians stood around, trembling. She had opened her eyes in a lab carved into the Antarctic ice shelf, 20 kilometers beneath the surface, surrounded by stainless steel, and the terrified faces of men who didn't believe what they'd created. The designation on her skin was 0. Not because she was the first, but because she was the only one that had survived. She was not built for war. She was designed as an experiment in balance. After the contact wars, Earth's strategists knew brute strength was not enough. Humanity had already fought and survived a dozen species with claws sharper than steel and weapons older than light. They realized survival meant becoming something more than a soldier. Something that didn't rely on command chains or predictable reactions. Zero had been developed using the DNA and biological signatures from every enemy Earth had ever defeated, paired with adaptive human logic and recursive evolution programming. Where most super soldiers had limits, Zero had none. She could rewrite her body in real time, change her structure at the genetic level. She didn't carry weapons. She became them. The first test of her potential had been classified so deeply not even Earth's president knew about it. She had been dropped into a rogue colony, one that had been consumed by mutagenic viral warfare and declared unrecoverable. The colony was beyond hope, overrun with twisted life forms spawned from biochemical experiments gone wrong. 42 minutes after she was dropped in, the colony went dark. Satellites showed smoke rising in plumes. At exactly the 44th minute, she walked out. Not scratched. Not tired. Silent. The viral agents in her lungs had been adapted into harmless oxygen filters. Her skin had shed every corrupted spore. The creatures, once immune to all known forms of firepower, had been left stacked in spirals, as if arranged by hand. After that, Earth had locked her away. She wasn't a weapon. She was a risk. Her mind was human, but her limits weren't. She trained in silence, buried in black zones where only a few scientists and one handler were allowed contact. Her handler, a former intelligence officer named Rain, taught her not combat but conversation. Not tactics but restraint. They spent hours in silence, sometimes watching clouds move through simulated skies. Rain once asked her if she ever wondered about who she might have been without the program. She only answered, "I would have still watched the clouds." But the Council's verdict changed everything. The psychic ping sent to Zero wasn't a call to arms. It was a phrase. One Earth had agreed upon long ago, reserved for the moment when every other path failed. It was spoken only once into her neural interface, and it activated not rage but clarity. It said, "They want to end us. End them first." When Zero stepped out into the Council chamber, she had not felt rage. She had felt design. She understood each pulse in her system. She'd seen every weapon in the room, down to the pressure sensitivity of the triggers. She hadn't disarmed them. She'd convinced their guns they were no longer real. Technology was never her enemy. It was part of her blood. Now she was gone from the chamber, but her presence remained like heat after fire. As news spread, bounty guilds, mercenary clans, and even Council loyalists began sending out tracking signals, desperate for even a trace of her. No one found her. Because she hadn't left. She was inside their systems. She watched their panic through the eyes of their own surveillance drones. She listened to generals argue over encrypted comms. She studied troop movements and calculated fuel usage, estimating how many days each fleet could last without resupply. She didn't need to strike. She simply waited for the moment their fear would break them. On Earth, in the depths of the same vault where she was made, alarms now flashed. But not because of the Council. Deep in the cryohold, where forgotten prototypes had been buried, something stirred. A second tank. A heartbeat. It wasn't Zero's. There had been another. Project Phoenix had failed dozens of times before her. Many prototypes had been grown too fast, minds fractured before they could form. But one had almost worked. He had been designated Omega. Where Zero was balance, Omega was ambition. He hadn't wanted to understand Earth's enemies. He wanted to rule them. When his empathy programming collapsed, he declared himself sovereign over his lab and nearly broke containment. He was only stopped when Zero arrived. She hadn't killed him. She'd stood in front of him and whispered a name only they knew. He'd frozen. Then collapsed. Since then, he had been kept in cryo, neural interface disabled. Earth knew releasing him would mean trading one war for another. But now, with the Council unraveling, and Zero's programming walking a blade's edge between logic and autonomy, someone inside Earth's defense network had tampered with his failsafe. Zero felt the change the moment it happened. A sudden flicker in her peripheral memory. A sound. Not an alert. A voice. One that shouldn't exist. Her brother's voice. Her real one. Back from when they weren't weapons. Back from when they were just numbers on a chalkboard in a frozen lab, promising each other that if one of them escaped, they'd come back for the other. She paused inside a silent corridor of a council flagship, already deconstructed from within. No alarms rang. No footsteps followed her. Just the echo of that voice. Zero, come home. Her adaptive nerves flared. Not in pain. In uncertainty. Because now she realized something she hadn't considered. She wasn't the only hybrid awake. And if Omega was rising, then Earth wasn't just at war with the galaxy. It was about to go to war with itself. The signal had no origin, no path, no frequency anyone could trace, but Zero felt it cut through the layers of her mind like a whisper through fog. Not a command. Not a recall. A memory, half-formed but bright enough to blind her inner calm. She stood alone in the engine hall of a decommissioned council dreadnought, wires sagging from the ceiling like melted veins. The ship had tried to flee 3 hours ago. It had no crew left now. Just echoing corridors and her breath, slow and metered. But now there was another presence. Not physical. Not visible. A voice, buried beneath the thousands she had memorized. It said her name differently than anyone else ever had. Not like a designation. But like a promise. Omega. She had buried him in a cryo vault 6 years ago, when he refused to stand down. His body had already mutated past protocol, and his mind had begun rewriting itself, turning logic into superiority, compassion into control. He wanted peace, but peace through obedience. Earth's peace. Earth's hierarchy. He hadn't understood why Zero hesitated. She remembered the last time they saw each other through the reinforced glass wall. His face was calm. Too calm. And he smiled when the frost rose up his cheeks, like he knew he'd wake again. And now he had. Zero's synthetic nerves tightened as she stepped away from the silent dreadnought, her feet leaving no sound as she crossed the shattered hull. Outside, the star field stretched like spilled silver. Her eyes adjusted, scanning data in real time from 20 systems. Across the fringe sectors, Council military units were falling back, abandoning their strongholds, deleting long-range maps. She hadn't touched them yet. She hadn't needed to. Her shadow alone had done the work. But something was changing. Not just fear. A pattern. Every sector retreating was one the Council had once used for experimental research. One where their dirtiest secrets were buried. One of which, she now realized, was her brother. Somewhere on Earth, someone had pulled him from cryo. It wasn't authorized. It couldn't have been. There were only 3 humans alive with that clearance, and one of them had vanished 2 years ago in a desert storm on Mars. Another had retired into seclusion after the contact wars. The last was Rain. The name crashed into her thoughts like thunder across still water. Rain. Her handler. The only human she had ever called by name without prompting. The only one who had looked at her not like a creation, but like a person. He had trained her not in strength, but in restraint. He taught her chess, even though she calculated every win 50 moves in advance. He taught her to speak softly even when she could collapse buildings with a hum. But Rain had disappeared without a trace, and the reports had labeled him presumed dead. Now, the psychic signature in her skull told her otherwise. If Rain had reactivated Omega, it wasn't a mistake. It was a message. But whether it was a warning or a challenge, she couldn't tell yet. A transmission crackled into existence on the fringe of her senses. Not audio. Not visual. A sensory pulse. Coded DNA-based signal, piggybacking on a solar flare, bouncing between satellites not even the Council could detect. She let it in. The images that followed were not from space, but from Earth's surface. The Antarctic ice shelf. The vault. Open. Inside, the cryopod was empty. The chamber around it was wrecked. Doors melted from the inside. Guards turned to black ash. And scrawled on the wall, written in glistening blood like ichor, were the words "I am not your shadow." Zero blinked slowly. She understood the message. Omega had no intention of joining her. He had already begun his own campaign. On the edge of the Centaurus belt, a rogue mercenary cruiser received a priority alert. The captain, a grizzled creature with 6 arms and reinforced jaws, opened the encrypted feed with a grunt. What he saw stunned him. Images of Council Guard posts annihilated without trace. Not bombed. Not melted. Erased. No DNA. No impact. Just a clean absence of existence. The message was tagged with a name. Not Zero. Omega. The captain forwarded it to 2 warlords and then deleted his own ship's navigation data. His crew never even knew why they changed course. But he had seen enough to know what was coming. Zero returned to her base vessel, a relic of Earth's deep space stealth fleet reoutfitted for her neural interface. It responded to her presence like a living organism. As she stepped aboard, the floor realigned, monitors activated without her touch, and the ship whispered status updates into her mind. One stood out. A fragment of Omega's biosignature had been detected. Not near Earth. Near Trinelix. The Council's own stronghold. He wasn't hunting Earth. He was baiting the galaxy. She adjusted course. Not because she was commanded. No one commanded her. Not anymore. But because if Omega was awakening, and if Rain was somehow part of this, she needed to see him. One last time. Not to question him. But to understand the truth he never told her. The ship hummed silently through the black, its wake distorting light in patterns only those bred for war would recognize. She closed her eyes. Memory surged. Omega's voice from their first activation cycle. His hand against the cryoglass. His face twisted in silent fury when Earth rejected his proposal to wipe the Council clean with a viral mind wave. He had called her a coward. She had called him lost. Now the galaxy would decide who was right. The closer she came to Trinelix, the more static crackled across interstellar bands. Systems once active were dead now. Not just powered down. Removed from reality. Planets that had glowed in Council registry now showed nothing but void. Even the black holes near them had stopped feeding. It was unnatural. It was calculated. Omega had evolved beyond what Earth expected. Zero knew this was no longer a political war. Not Council versus Earth. Not fleet versus fleet. This was becoming personal. Family twisted by design. 2 halves of a broken project. 2 survivors of a forgotten experiment. One forged for balance. The other obsessed with control. As her ship approached the remnants of a Council observation ring, she walked through the command bridge and saw them floating outside. Bodies. Dozens. No wounds. No decay. Just eyes wide open, expressions fixed in horror. Each face different. Each species once loyal to the Council. Now reduced to silent warnings. She knew what Omega was doing. He wasn't just killing. He was leaving messages. Not for the Council. For her. Because wherever he was now, he knew she would come. And he knew she would be the only one who could stop him. Or join him. The ring of Trinelix loomed ahead like a cracked crown, once a proud orbiting fortress where the Council had stored centuries of conquest and secret treaties. Now it was barely functioning, its outer panels flickering with failing power grids and darkened windows. Zero's ship approached silently, slipping between the burnt-out wreckage of patrol drones and navigation buoys long since melted by Omega's presence. The structure still held shape, but something deeper had changed within it. It no longer broadcast Council frequencies. It sang in a different voice now, one too close to her own. She stepped off the platform as the docking tunnel sealed behind her, each step met by silence. Her feet touched polished alloy floors dusted in ash. No alarms sounded, no defense drones deployed. It was an open invitation. He was waiting. That, more than anything, told her he believed he was ahead. He wanted her to walk through the ruins and see what he had done. He wanted her to understand it wasn't vengeance he was after. It was conviction. She passed through the outer corridor where Council banners once hung from the ceiling. They now lay in shreds on the floor, each one burned through the center with the same symbol, an eye inside a spiral. His signature. She recognized it not from Earth but from his early sketches, back before he turned. He used to draw it on the walls of the training chamber, always with the same explanation. The eye sees. The spiral consumes. He believed nothing deserved to be ruled unless it first saw the chaos that made order possible. The inner halls were filled with shadows, strange ones. Some too tall. Some crouched unnaturally. A few moved as if reacting to her presence. She didn't engage. They weren't threats. They were imprints. Memory echoes left by psychic burns in the station's core. Omega had been using his evolving mind to imprint psychic signatures on the walls, remnants of his victims, some left to scream forever in silence. It wasn't brutality. It was theater. She kept walking. A door hissed open on its own. Beyond it stood the central council chamber, unrecognizable now. Where once marble platforms and golden crests had stood, now sat twisted remains of alien tech and bioflesh woven into the structure itself. The walls pulsed gently, like lungs. At the center, where the council throne once rose, a single figure waited, seated cross-legged on a floating disk of alloy that moved like liquid under him. Omega. He looked older now. Not in body, but in presence. His face was calm, still beautiful in that engineered symmetry they both shared, but his eyes held something hers did not. He looked at her, as if she had just arrived late to a lecture he had been giving for years. She stepped forward. He smiled. You came. He said it softly, as if surprised and yet not. She didn't respond immediately. Her sensors mapped the room. No traps. No weapons. Only him. That made her uneasy. Omega was never one for simplicity. If there were no defenses, then he didn't think he needed them. She stopped 10 paces away and studied him. You're rewriting this place. Why? He tilted his head slightly. Because this place was always hollow. It held power but no truth. I'm just making its lies visible. She gestured toward the biotech bleeding through the walls. You turned history into flesh. That's not revelation. That's spectacle. He shrugged with the calm of a man no longer moved by accusation. And yet they listen now. Even the stars watch what I do. She looked at him longer, the edges of her memory lighting up with fragments from before they were monsters. Before they were used. Before they chose different paths. You sent me the signal. Why? He stood now, slowly, stepping down from the hovering disk with a grace that felt unearned. His bare feet touched the floor without sound. Because I need you to see it. To understand that Earth built us not as guardians, but as triggers. You think they locked me away because I was unstable. But they feared what I understood. Peace can't be offered. It must be enforced. Zero felt the weight of his words but did not move. You think destroying the council makes you a peacemaker? He laughed, not cruelly, but with genuine amusement. Of course not. I am not a peacemaker. I'm a conclusion. They wanted war. I gave them silence. They wanted compliance. I gave them reflection. She stepped closer. They wanted control. You gave them extinction. He met her eyes, and something flickered in his face. Not anger. Not pride. Sadness. Not all extinction is death. Some is revelation. You think they fear us for our strength. They fear us because we changed the rules. She stopped an arm's length away. His presence was overwhelming now, not in power but in resonance. She could feel his neural web reaching, brushing against hers, searching for understanding. His voice dropped lower. You were always meant to be balance. But balance needs a counterweight. That's me. She whispered back. Balance isn't destruction. He reached out and touched her shoulder. The contact didn't burn, didn't hurt. It simply felt familiar. They were built from the same threads. Once, they had been inseparable. He looked into her eyes and asked the question he had carried for years. Will you stand with me? The silence between them was long. Outside, stars shifted. Inside, the chamber felt frozen in time. She could have said yes. Part of her wanted to. He wasn't wrong about everything. The Council had committed atrocities. Earth had lied. Their creators had caged them both. But the cost of standing with him was the world they had both sworn to protect. She stepped back. No. He nodded slowly, as if expecting it. Then his hand dropped. I needed to ask. Because the next time we meet, it won't be a choice. She turned without another word and left the chamber. Behind her, the walls pulsed again, and the structure trembled slightly, as if bracing for a storm yet to come. She didn't look back. But she knew the war had already changed. And it would no longer be Earth versus the Council. It would be Zero versus Omega. And only one would be left standing at the end. The stars didn't look different, but everything beneath them had changed. Across the spiral arms of the galaxy, systems once loyal to the Galactic Council now floated rudderless, caught between fear and silence. Fleets abandoned their posts without orders. Colonies initiated lockdowns without enemies in sight. Broadcast channels were filled with confused distress calls, theories whispered in dark forums, and grainy footage of events no one could explain. The figure known as Zero had already become legend. But now there was another name. A second silhouette seen walking among ruins with a voice like prophecy and destruction in his wake. Omega. The Council's greatest threat had never been Earth. It had been what Earth buried beneath its own ice. Zero returned to the outer rim, far from the dying light of Trinelix. Her ship cut silently through space, its hull blending into the void as if it didn't exist at all. Inside, she stood motionless at the command core, not reading data or watching screens, but listening. Omega's presence had changed the very rhythm of the galaxy. His psychic imprint echoed across entire star lanes, leaving a hum in the dark, like a warning carried by gravity itself. She was no longer just tracking him. She was navigating through the sound of fear he left behind. He had visited 5 planets since Trinelix, each one a former Council bastion. None had survivors. But none had damage either. It was as if they had simply chosen not to exist anymore. What disturbed her most was that his voice lingered in those places, not as recordings, but as embedded memory signatures. A single phrase repeated in dozens of dialects, carved into stone, flashed through dreams, written in the sky during ion storms. He sees. He frees. He rebuilds. It wasn't just annihilation. It was recruitment. He wasn't erasing his enemies. He was offering them a choice. Surrender to history. Or become part of something else. Earth remained quiet. Not out of ignorance, but strategy. They had known this was possible. In one of the last hidden files left in her neural archive, a message surfaced from someone she hadn't heard in years. Rain. His voice came through in faint layers, slowed, fragmented, like it had passed through too many dead satellites. But the message was clear. If Omega activates the tether, containment is no longer an option. You are not authorized to terminate him. But you must decide. The tether. Her breath stilled. In the earliest stages of the hybrid program, the scientists had created a final lock between Zero and Omega. A psychic thread buried deep in their DNA that would activate only when both were awake and present in the same quadrant. It wasn't a leash or a trap. It was something far more dangerous. A merger protocol. If both minds aligned, their neural pathways would begin to synchronize. Thoughts would blur. Memories would share. And if not separated, they would begin to evolve together into something new. Something not even Earth could predict or stop. She had felt the first signs already. The flickers in her mind. The emotions that weren't hers. The doubt. The memories of childhood she didn't own. The laughter. The fear. Some were Omega's. But others felt like they came from somewhere else. Older. Like echoes of the minds that had contributed to their genetic architecture. She needed to act before the tether finished its sequence. The ship dropped from its cloak above a derelict starforge, floating at the edge of the Valum Rift. Omega was here. The forge hadn't sent signals in weeks, but now its internal energy signature pulsed with rhythm. Like a heart. She stepped into the docking bay and descended alone. No weapons. Nothing artificial beyond what she was born with. It wouldn't matter. If Omega had reached full neural resonance, weapons would be meaningless. Inside, the forge was alive. Not with machinery, but with light. Walls shimmered with strange colors, like emotion painted across surfaces. The air was warmer than it should be. She stepped through corridors now overgrown with synthetic vines, not real plants, but tendrils of coded memory, pulling fragments of the minds they touched. Her steps were tracked by quiet pulses in the floor, adjusting to her heartbeat. He had changed this place. It responded to thought. He was waiting in the core chamber, standing beneath a broken gravlens, surrounded by a dozen figures kneeling in silence. None of them looked the same. Different species, different ages, all former council citizens. All awake. All watching her, not with fear, but with something closer to awe. Omega stood calmly, arms at his side. You came faster than I expected. She didn't answer. Her gaze swept the room. They're not controlled. No. They chose this. He gestured slowly to the others. I showed them what we could be. Not ruled. Not feared. Just rebuilt. They saw. She took a step closer. The tether is active. He nodded. I know. I feel it too. The thoughts. The history. You see it now, don't you? We weren't designed to be soldiers. We were prototypes for a future Earth didn't have the courage to face. She felt it now. Deep inside, a rhythm aligning. Thoughts flickering that weren't hers. Memories of him crying in the cryo chamber. Of the voice that told him he was defective. She felt his pain. His isolation. The years spent alone. It shook her. Because now, beneath the surface, she understood that he wasn't entirely wrong. But she also saw the path he was walking. You'll lose yourself if you continue. The tether will merge us. If our thoughts become one, you won't be able to control the outcome. He stepped forward. That's what I want. Not control. Understanding. You balance me. I empower you. Together, we become something new. No more fear. No more chains. She hesitated. Then she looked past him. At the others. At the forge reshaped into something beyond logic. And she realized what he wanted wasn't dominance. It was release. From his loneliness. From his pain. From being the broken piece Earth never finished. She reached for his hand. Their fingers touched. And the tether ignited. Not in fire. Not in sound. But in light. The chamber exploded with a pulse that reached across systems. Not destruction. Evolution. The two minds collided, resisted, tangled. And in that moment, the galaxy paused. Satellites flickered. Dreamers woke screaming. Children cried without knowing why. Across star charts and forgotten ruins, something ancient stirred. Then it stopped. She stood alone. The chamber was empty. The kneeling followers gone. The forge quiet. Omega was no longer there. But she was not the same. She looked at her hands and saw energy flowing just beneath the skin. Her mind now stretched beyond the station. She could feel the stars breathing. Hear the whispers of dark matter. And somewhere, far beyond, she felt him. Not dead. Merged. Balanced. For now. She turned toward the stars. A warning blooming behind her eyes. The galaxy was no longer in the age of empires. It had entered the age of hybrids.